This is Brett Richardson with the Virginia Market News Service, and welcome to the 2021 Virtual Eastern Shore Ag Conference. It's hard to believe how much the world has changed since we met last year. Things happened in 2020 that no one could have predicted. As we enter 2021, we certainly hope for better times ahead, but there still is a lot of uncertainty. Rather than try to make any predictions for what could happen later this year, this presentation will primarily concentrate on the current situation with potato supplies and prices to give everyone an idea of where we stand compared to previous years. But we will start with a few observations on the impact of COVID on market conditions of agricultural commodities. When COVID first emerged, there were concerns about the food supply chain and possible food shortages. At one point, many of the nation's beef, pork, and poultry processing plants were shut down or running at reduced capacity due to COVID's effect on workers. There were concerns about whether vegetable crops would be able to be harvested due to potential workforce shortages. And although there were difficulties, fortunately the food supply chain held up and there were no major shortages. There was, however, a change in consumer behavior as people were cooking more meals at home due to quarantine restrictions and restaurant closings. Consumers who were stuck at home and cooking more of their meals for themselves realized that potatoes are a good value, and demand at the retail level has been good. Unfortunately, with restaurant and school closings, the loss of food service business has had a negative impact on many agricultural commodities, and potatoes are no exception. In the early stages of the pandemic, food service business was estimated to be down by 60 to 90%, although by summer when we were harvesting our potato crop, it was estimated to be down around 50%. The loss of food service business definitely has had an impact on sales of the Virginia potato crop in 2020, and is one explanation as to why red potato prices suffered last year and demand was down. Another important observation concerning the relation between COVID and agricultural commodities is that prices were extremely volatile, especially in the early stages of the outbreak. Fortunately, prices for most, but not all commodities have recovered from the lows of earlier in the year. Grain prices have improved dramatically, due primarily to high export sales and production problems in South America. Other commodities, particularly cattle, and to a lesser extent poultry and pork, have continued to suffer. Potato prices were unique in that they increased during the spring and summer, but have dropped late in the year. Red potatoes and carton count russets have suffered the biggest decreases. An interesting question to consider is whether higher grain prices could increase grain acreage in 2021 and potentially reduce potato acreage in areas where growers produce both. Let's take a look now at the current supply situation. The December potato stocks report shows how many potatoes are in storage, and stocks are up slightly compared to last year. Potatoes in storage are up less than 1% from December 2019 and are actually 1% lower than the 5-year average. Disappearance is down 7% from last year, and this is an indicator that movement has been a little slow. The decline in movement is primarily processing potatoes, including frozen and dehydrated. Fresh market movement is up from last year. 65% of the fall crop is in storage, and that number is fairly typical. The biggest increases are in the West. Colorado, North Dakota, and Oregon have the biggest increases. The biggest decreases, Maine and Michigan. Nationwide, there is a slightly higher percentage of round white and yellows and fewer russets. However, the percentages are very close to what they were last year. Looking now at Canadian production and stocks, 2020 Canadian production decreased by 1%. Production decreases occurred primarily in the eastern provinces due to adverse weather conditions, with Prince Edward Island decreasing by nearly 14% and New Brunswick down by nearly 30%. There were increases out west, Manitoba and Alberta, but another area that's important to us, Ontario, had a fairly sizable production increase. Canadian January stocks are down nearly 7%. Fresh market stocks are down 6%. Processing stocks are down 7%. Ontario has more chip stock potatoes in storage than they had last year, although that is at least partially offset by decreases in Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick. We now have a pretty good idea on the supply situation. Let's take a look now at market conditions in January. Demand ranges from light to moderate in most areas, and prices are mostly lower compared to last January. Russet film bags are mixed. Prices are lower in the west, but slightly higher in the east. The larger size russets, the carton counts, are 30 to 50% lower than last year. Round white potatoes in Maine are up slightly, but red prices are down, mostly 30 to 40% lower than last year. And yellows are generally steady to slightly lower. But we need to look more at just what the price relation is to last year to really get the idea. So let's take a look how prices are stacking up against the 5-year average. Maine round white prices are 20% higher than the 5-year average. Russet film bags are mostly 15% higher than the 5-year average. Now russet cartons are mostly 7% lower than the 5-year average. So they're hurting a little bit. And the reds, the A's are mostly steady, but the B's are 12% lower than the 5-year average. Yellow potatoes are mostly 15 to 20% higher. And I don't want to forget our chipstock growers. Chipstock potatoes are a very important part of our potato crop. Movement was moderate to fairly good for chipstock potatoes in early 2020, but movement has slowed recently. One explanation I have heard is that as financial situations get tougher for consumers, there is less money to be spent on snack foods. So although initial demand for the potato chips were good, it's starting to slow down a little bit. Storage supplies appear to be adequate, and the industry is comfortable with the current supply situation. Looking at Florida, contract prices are reported to be pretty much unchanged from last year. Now, contract volume is very similar, although I have heard of a few instances of some contract acreage cuts in Florida. It's still unsettled in Virginia and North Carolina, but the indications I'm getting is that there won't be any major changes. And just one other note for the chipstock guys, supplies of Atlantic seed is light. I hope this presentation helps to give you an idea of the current situation with potatoes. I'm not going to lie, there is still uncertainty facing us due to the pandemic, and no one can predict what the situation will be this summer. But we faced this pandemic last year and came through it, and we can do it again. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully next year we can do this in person.